Our author tonight is Caitlin Doughty, whose new book is titled From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death. You might know Caitlin from her previous book, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, which took you behind the scenes at her job as a mortician. It was a favorite among staff here, and it looks like it probably was for a whole bunch more people as well. So we've all been even more excited to have her here for this book, which expands her debut's look at this country's thoughts on dead bodies to look at a wider world's thoughts on dead bodies. It's just as macabre and it's just as delightful. So I'll let her tell you more about that. But first I'll say that there are some really beautiful illustrations in this book by Landis Blair. And one of those has been turned into a really great poster, which we have available behind the register. They've been signed now by Caitlin, and they're available if you purchase 2 or more copies today. So we have those books behind the registers. And without any further ado, Caitlin Doughty.
Hello, DC. Hi. Am I on? Can you hear me? It's on? Excellent. I was like hiding in the calendars, like in the puppy calendars. It's like, unlikely friends, adorable. Thank you for having me. You sure you can hear me in the back? Okay, don't be heroes. I am so glad to be here. I've actually never spoken in DC before, and I've always really, really want to. And here I am. Thank you for having me. So what I wanted to tell you tonight is a story that I had never really told before, and it's the story of how this new book came to be. So I want to take you back first, a long, long time ago, when I hadn't even entered the funeral industry yet, and I was still a young college student, medieval history graduate, and I was able to go to Europe for 3 months. And all I wanted to do there was go to one death destination after another, death destinations, as I may know I call them. And I had a book called Weird Europe. And I'm not sure if this book is still in print, but it had little descriptions of, you can see this monk's or a saint's bone in somewhere in Poland, or you can see these 14 mummified monks under a church in Italy. And I remember thinking, that's someone's job to write about death around the world. I wonder if I could have that job. No, such dream would be too much for me. And I forget about this, and fast forward to 2011, and I have just started my web series, Ask a Mortician. And if you remember anything else about the year 2012, it was also the era of the wacky job reality TV show. So if you were a children's dance instructor or an ice road trucker, you would get a reality TV show. So when I show up as a sort of camera-ready mortician, the chum was just in the water. And they were so excited to find me. And so I would get all of these emails from producers saying, have you ever thought about television? But don't get too excited for my career, because a lot of these offers were something along the line of, okay, so what we're gonna do is have you get in a hearse and drive to pick up a date, and then you're going to go to like a cemetery or an old mental asylum, and you're gonna ghost hunt. And if your date can handle it, then you'll go on another date or something. And I was like, thanks, but no thanks with that offer. But then I get a email from a producer from a network that I had grown up with a name that I had grown up with. I won't say the name because I'm not entirely sure of the legalities of telling this story. But it said, if you could decide what kind of show you wanted to do, what would it be? And I thought back to my times of Weird Europe and my times of death destinations, and I thought, what about traveling around the world to look at death and death customs? And to my surprise, they said, yeah, great, let's shoot a pilot. So they flew out this whole crew to Los Angeles, where I live. And at first, the head of the network said he really wasn't sure about the whole death thing, which I understand. Corpses on primetime TV may be a bridge too far. But we shot the pilot at the Temple Santa Muerte on Melrose Avenue. And for those of you who are familiar with Santa Muerte, she's a Latin American folk saint, usually depicted as a woman. And she's getting wildly popular. I think she has something like 12 million devotees now. And what she does is she offers inroads into the beyond that the Catholic Church doesn't always offer to maybe the LGBT community, or originally she was associated with the criminal element, though that's changing. And so we shot there, we shot the ritual there, we interviewed Professor Sisyphus, who is the priest there and a very fascinating man. And they make it into this sizzle reel that will go to the head of the network to decide if they're going to order the 13 episodes for us to travel. And it goes to the network, and I get a call from the producer, and he says, guess what, Caitlin? They really have gotten over the whole death thing. But the head of the network says, when it comes down to it, no one is going to watch a show like this hosted by a woman. Ooh, thank you for that gasp. The way the world is now, I was like, oh, I'm going to tell that story, and people are going to be like, yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, that was my Thursday, too. Thanks. So the first thing they do is like say, don't worry about it. What we're going to do is find you a male co-host for this. And I'm not entirely sure if it was like, oh, it's been a long day on set, and he needs to prop me up with his penis or something. I don't know. But they try to find me a male co-host, and they're asking me, okay, who's the expert on this? Who's the expert on, like, death? And I was like, the expert is me. I'm the expert. But they try, and I told them who they would and would not be able to get and who wouldn't work. And finally, they're like, oh, we couldn't find anyone. Yeah, I told you that. But we parted ways, and I said, never again television. But when Smoke Gets in Your Eyes came out a few years ago, and it was successful, my editor said, what's your next book? I'm so excited for your next book. And I said, there is no next book. That was the book. Yay! I did a book. Woo! And he said, no. Dig deep, find the second book. And I thought back to Weird Europe. I thought back to Destinations. I thought back to this failed television show. And I thought, okay, I've actually been in the funeral industry for almost 10 years at this point. And I have this whole advocacy that's developed and all of these things I care about. And I would have a totally different relationship now with traveling around and seeing other death customs than I would have prior. And I think this could be really good. And I'll say two things. One, there's a lot made about the lack of diversity in publishing, and that's 100% true. But I was never made to feel at any point like I could not be a woman writing this book. In fact, I would tell my editor, I'm off to rural Indonesia for 2 weeks, and he would say, good luck, get the great stories. He was never like worried about my ability to hang out with the mummies. And the second thing is that knowing the stories that I got in this book and the families that I was able to meet and the people that I was able to talk to, the idea now of coming in with like 10 American dude bros with cameras in tow to film everything is actually pretty horrifying to me. And I'm so glad that that is not the direction that it went. So the thing that people have been asking me is, how did you decide where to go? There are 165 countries. And the answer is where I could get respectful access. So by access, I mean places that a normal journalist or a normal tourist wouldn't be able to go. So for example, in Bali, they do this thing where they put a ruler, or when a ruler dies, they put them in this 2-story tall jeweled bull figure, and they roll the jeweled bull down the street, and when it gets to the end of the route, they set the whole thing on fire, like Burning Man, and the bull burns down and cremates the bodies. This is incredible, and I would love to see it someday, but pretty much anyone can show up to this. So it had to be someplace that not just everyone could show up to. And the second thing is it had to be respectful. I didn't want to bumble into some family's home as this big white girl and be like, I heard your dad died, sucks, tell me your story, because that's not the kind of person or the kind of writer that I want to be. So it had to be both respectful and special access. And I want to do, before we get to the Q&A, which is always my favorite part, and with an audience like this, I know there's going to be good questions. I want to do 2 short readings. They're very, very different, but I think they both elucidate something that I think is profoundly lacking from the American funeral industry as it currently is. So I'm going to attempt to switch to that microphone. Are we still okay? All right. Now I will, it's rolling away. No, okay. Now we will wait while I open this book. Here we are. This is, by the way, in rural Indonesia, as I was referring to earlier. The morning began with the sound of a plaintive gong tolling along the village road. This announced the official start of the manene. The first mummy I saw wore 80s-style aviator sunglasses with yellow-tinted frames. Damn, I thought. That guy looks like my middle school algebra teacher. One young man stood the mummy up as another sliced into its navy blazer with a pair of scissors, cutting all the way down to his pants, revealing the torso and legs. Given that this gentleman had been dead 8 years, he was remarkably well preserved, with no obvious gashes or breaks in the flesh. 2 coffins down, another fellow hadn't been so lucky. His body was entirely shriveled, nothing left but thin strips of dried skin over bone, held together by gold-embroidered cloth. Wearing nothing but boxer shorts and the aviators, the mummy was placed on the ground, a pillow beneath his head. An 8x10 framed portrait photo taken during his life sat propped next to his body. Alive, he had looked far less like my math teacher than he did today, 8 years into mummification. A group of women fell to their knees beside the man and keened, wailing his name and stroking his cheeks. When their wails softened, the man's son moved in with a set of paintbrushes, the kind you'd buy at a local hardware store. The son began to clean the corpse, brushing his father's leathery skin with short, loving strokes. A cockroach scampered out from inside the boxer shorts. The son didn't seem to mind and carried on brushing. This was mourning as I had never seen it before. 10 minutes earlier, our guide had received a call that there were mummies being unwrapped at a hard-to-reach grave by the river. We sped in that direction, running along a narrow dirt path through a rice field. The path ended in a ditch of brown water. With no ford or bridge, we groaned and plowed through the thick mud. I slid down an embankment on my butt. When we arrived at the site, almost 40 bodies had been removed from their house grave and lined up in rows on the ground. Some were wrapped in brightly colored cloths. Others were in slender wooden coffins, and some were wrapped in cartoon quilts and blankets. We're talking Hello Kitty, SpongeBob SquarePants, and various Disney characters. The family moved from body to body, deciding whom to unwrap. Some were unknown. Nobody remembered exactly who they were. And some were top priority, a beloved husband or daughter whom they missed and couldn't wait to see again. A mother unwrapped her son, who had died when he was only 16. At first, all that could be seen were a crooked pair of feet. Hands emerged and seemed well enough preserved. Men on either side of the coffin pulled gently on the body, testing to see if they could lift it without the body crumbling. They managed to stand him vertical, and though his torso had been preserved, his face was skeletal, excepting his teeth and thick brown hair. His mother didn't seem to mind. She was ecstatic to see her child, even for a moment, even in this state, and held his hand and touched his face. Nearby, a son brushed the skin. But tickle in my throat, I sound like I'm choking up. Which I am. My writing is incredibly beautiful. I just get myself every time. Nearby, a son brushed the skin of his father, whose face was stained pink from his batik wrapping. He was a good man, he said. He had 8 children. I'm sad, but happy, because I can care for him as he did for me. So the thing that I like to think about visiting these mummies, which sometimes were kept in the house for years, and then sometimes were transferred to the grave and brought out of the grave and cleaned and redressed, is that I'm not suggesting that any of you do this with your mother. I'm not suggesting that the American funeral industry is going to adopt this next. But what I will say is that it's important to know that this is happening right now out in the world. Because in the American funeral industry, what I hear again and again is somebody's mother dies and everyone around them treats it like an emergency. This person has died, we have to get this corpse out right now. The funeral home has to come in, they have to take the body, and this is your only option. It's like the corpse becomes a radioactive problem. When in reality, there are people in Indonesia who are keeping mom at home for not just a day, not just 2 weeks, but years sometimes. So we can certainly have the conversation about keeping your mom at home for an hour or 2 hours, or until you feel confident enough to make the decision to let her go. So the second reading that I want to do is, again, very different, but shows another thing that the American funeral industry needs to get moving on. We'll see if I can do this without choking up. If I move myself, I move myself. The Buddhist Temple, a 17th century building tucked away off a quiet street in Tokyo, is home to a modest cemetery with aged headstones representing generations of families that have come to worship here. Yajima Jushoku means head priest or monk, emerged to greet me, an affable man in a brown robe with close-cropped white hair and glasses. In contrast to his archaic surroundings, Yajima Jushoku is a man of new ideas, specifically how to memorialize cremated remains. My kind of guy. When the temple reached capacity, the priest Yajima could have invested in old-fashioned cemetery space. Instead, 7 years ago, he built the Ruriden Columbarium. Columbaria are separate buildings for storing cremated remains. I probably don't have to add that note for anyone here. Buddhism has always been state-of-the-art, he explained. It's quite natural to use technology alongside Buddhism. I see no conflict at all. With that, he showed me through the doors of the complex's newest hexagonal building. I stood in the darkness while Yajima punched something into the keypad at the entrance. Moments later, 2,000 floor-to-ceiling Buddhas began to glow and pulse a vivid blue. What? I bleated, stunned and delighted. I had seen photographs of Ruriden, but to be surrounded 360 degrees by the luminous Buddhas was overwhelming. Yajima opened a locked door, and I peeked behind the Buddha walls at 600 sets of bones. Labeled to make it easy to find Miss Kubota-san, he smiled. Each set of cremated remains corresponded to a crystal Buddha on the wall. When a family member comes to visit Ruriden, they either type in the name of the deceased or they pull out a smart card with a chip, similar to cards used on Tokyo's subways. After the family keys in at the entrance, the walls light up blue, except for one single Buddha shimmering clear white. No need to squint through names trying to find Mom. The white light will guide you straight to her. All of this evolved, said Yajima. For example, we started with a touchpad where you type in your family member's name. One day I saw a very old woman struggling to type a name in, so that's where we got the smart cards. She just has to tap the card and can immediately find her dead person. Yajima headed back to the keypad controller and instructed me to stand in the center of the room. The autumn scene, he announced, and the formation of Buddhas turned yellow and brown with shifting red patches like piles of freshly fallen leaves. Winter scene, and the Buddhas turned to snowdrifts of light blue and white. Shooting star. And the Buddhas turned purple as white spots jumped from Buddha to Buddha like a stop-motion animation of the night sky. This LED light show could have been a Disney production, but there was something in the sophisticated design of the lights that made it feel as though I were being swaddled in a Technicolor womb. Yajima invited me for tea inside the temple and offered me a stool brought out for visiting foreigners. He believed I couldn't endure sitting cross-legged on the floor mats for the duration of tea and conversation. I assured him I absolutely could. I couldn't. My legs fell painfully asleep within the first 3 minutes. I asked Yajima why he had designed Ruriden the way he did, and his response was impassioned. The family is supposed to look after your grave, but we don't have enough people to look after everyone's grave. We had to do something for those people left behind. Each morning, Yajima enters Ruriden and punches in the day's date. That morning he punched May 13th. Several Buddhas glowed yellow, representing the people who had died on that day. Yajima lit incense and prayed for them. He remembers them even if there's no family left to do so. For an elderly man or woman with no remaining family, the glowing Buddhas at Ruriden will act as their afterlife community. Yajima Jushoku may be a powerful priest, but he's also a designer. When I pray, I also think about creating. How do we create something new, filled with dazzling light? How do we create new Buddhas? For him, the act of prayer is essential to creativity. Every time I pray, different ideas pop up. I'm not a man who sits at a desk to create a plan. It's all while I'm praying. What if Ruriden fills up with ashes? If it fills up, then I will consider a second or third, Yajima smiled. I'm already thinking of them. So, oh, thank you. Which sound quality do we like better? Do we like this or do we like this? Do we like this? The first one? Okay. All right. Sticking with that. So that's the second thing that I really think we need to embrace, which is the use of innovation and technology. If you know anything about the American funeral industry, innovation means we got a Facebook page. Or it means we put a QR code on a headstone. Isn't that exciting? Well, not really when Japan has floor-to-ceiling light-up Buddhas that bring butts to the seats. You know, it brings people in because it's so beautiful and so fascinating of a place. And I've also changed a bit my opinion on technology with use on funerals. When I first started, I remember thinking that the only way to really do a funeral right is to create a sensory deprivation chamber where you would put the corpse and you would put the family in and they had to leave all technology outside and you would just be in this magical bubble with the corpse. But that's not really reality, is it? That's not really the world that we live in anymore. And do you remember the controversy of selfies at funerals? Anyone remember this? Someone put up a Tumblr with all of these examples of teenagers taking selfies at funerals. And some of them were with the actual dead body. It was like, hey, mom in the casket or grandma in the casket. But most of them were just someone in the back seat of a car saying, I'm on my way to grandma's funeral. And they were just destroyed on the internet. And I wrote a post defending them. And people were not happy about that. They were like, bad take, Caitlin. I followed you, but I will never follow you again. And, you know, internet outrage. But I stand by my defense because these are teenagers who we gave them these smartphones from the second they were born. We put them in their hands. We raised them with them. We raised them with social media. And this is their world. This is how they interact with their friends. And if they're saying, I'm on my way to my grandmother's funeral, it might not be to be like, haha, funerals mean nothing. It might be because they're looking for sympathy. Or it might be because they're looking to interact and tell people that their grandma has died, and that's why they're not posting, or that's why they're not interacting. And these are a valuable thing to learn about where our culture is going, because otherwise we can't design our funerals and we can't design our memorialization around what our culture is becoming. So if I could see two things changed about the funeral industry, I have a list of about 497 things I'd like to see changed, but just two things would be: one, more acceptance of the dead body, and two, more acceptance of innovation and what that can do for us to get people in, to get people mourning, and to open up the conversation. So that's my little talk for the night. Where's the actual microphone that people would ask questions? Oh, we got one. Oh, we got one here, and we got one here. Step on up. Who wants to ask a question about death? Bow, 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 bow. That's my come on down music. Oh, hello. Ah, a young death enthusiast. My favorite kind. What is your question?
Is it true that in the medieval ages they used to bury the corpses in wax and salt to keep them preserved?
Oh, that's a awesome question. Adults, step up. His question was, is it true in the medieval ages that they used to coat the corpse in wax and salt to keep them preserved? They did all sorts of cool things to keep bodies preserved in the Middle Ages. My favorite thing, so I was a medieval history major, so I love medieval death trivia. And one of the coolest things I think about the Middle Ages that we don't recognize now is that there used to be dead bodies everywhere. So they might try and they used to make, wax death masks, but that was if you were a real fancy person. That's if you were a ruler or you were a noble or you had resources or someone trying to preserve you. But for everyone else, there were just corpses everywhere. So say that this was a chapel and we were at a church service. There would be corpses in all the walls, in all the book stacks. There would be corpses up in the ceiling. There would be corpses beneath the floor. There would be corpses buried in this table right here. There would be a corpse buried in this podium. There would be a corpse everywhere because they wanted to be closer to the church and whoever was preaching. So it would smell like there were corpses in here, too. So it wasn't just like perfectly preserved corpses, it was a fresh corpse as well. And if you weren't rich enough to be buried here in Politics and Prose, you would be put outside in the parking lot or outside the churchyard, and they would let you decompose for a certain amount of time, and then they would take your bones and put them in what's called a charnel house, which is just a big room of bones for people who had decomposed. So there's all sorts of cool medieval church. But that's a good question. Maybe I'll do a video about that. I'll do more research on exactly waxen corpses. 'Cause I know Queen Elizabeth did that. There's all sorts of. She didn't want to be embalmed, but they made a wax effigy of her, and they did. So yeah, that deserves more research. What's your name?
Jay.
Jay. Okay. Let me remember. Everyone here needs to. If I tweet out who was the young person who asked me about the wax medieval corpses, tweet Jay back at me. Thank you. Good question. You can never get them too early, in my opinion.
Hello, Caitlin. My wife is a photographer, and she just started photographing funerals. That became part of her job. So my question to you is, as someone who didn't really understand how that would go over, I saw in her first couple funerals how family members reacted and how much they appreciated it. Kind of went along with your technology in the funeral industry in the future. Where do you see that going, and how that will change the funeral industry, for instance, with things like photography and how that will affect and impact families?
Yeah, everybody always asks, post-mortem photography in the late Victorian and early 20th century was so beautiful and so meaningful. What happened to that? Where did it go? Why don't we photograph our dead anymore? And the answer is, well, first of all, it was really a kind of magical technology back then, and the photo you had of your dead child or your dead wife or mother might be the only photograph that was ever taken of her. And so it was a much more specialized thing, and now we're sort of like, oh, but we can remember them alive, and we have all of these photos, and they're in our memory, and here's mom's Instagram, we'll just do that. Instead of taking a picture of her dead body. But the community that it's really been thriving in for a long time is the baby loss and baby death community. There's all sorts of beautiful photos being done of stillborn infants that ends up being really meaningful for the family because they were all ready to photograph their beautiful bouncing baby boy or girl. Turns out they don't get to do that and still photographing them means so much to them and having those photographs. It's also a cultural thing. I had someone at a recent event come up and say, I grew up in a Mexican-American family in Los Angeles, and when my grandma died, my mom just handed me a disposable camera and was like, go to town, get lots of pictures of grandma. And so it's really sort of our own squeamishness around it. And I've never had anybody regret having photographs of the event, either when someone's dying or after the death. So I think just as you experienced, people end up really liking it, and the more that they tell other people that they really liked it and it wasn't weird and it actually was a beautiful memory, the more that we can potentially bring it back. But I'm all for it. Hi.
Oh, hello. So this is kind of a weird question.
No, there are no weird questions
Yeah.
here.
I know where I am.
Good luck.
but
Good luck with that one.
So I'm getting married in 9 days. I'm very excited. And I'm like, I know, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. He's not here. He's not a deathling. But anyway,
Are you sure you want to marry this person?
he cooks me food. So
That's a plus. I like
I'm
to hear
working
that.
on it. We're
Okay.
working on it. But anyways, because of that, I'm like, oh, romance and love and all that stuff. But I'm wondering, what in your experience is the weirdest, wildest way someone's attempted to immortalize their dead spouse?
Oh, so many good answers to that. Some of you in this room may be familiar with one Carl Tanzler. No? Oh, I was expecting a gasp. Guys, come on. Let's get up with this. I have so many videos to make. So Carl Tanzler was a German physician living in Florida, and it was in the 1920s or 30s. And he fell in love with this young woman named Elena Hoyos. And he was desperately in love with her. And when she died, it was very unclear if she was into him. My guess is no. That's just my instinct as a woman. But he was obsessed with her, and she, I believe, had cholera. She had one of those, like, Florida 1920s diseases. And she dies. And they put her, he loves her so much that he puts her in this beautiful mausoleum that the family never would have been able to afford otherwise. But by purchasing this beautiful mausoleum, it meant that he had access to her body. And he began a very long campaign of preservation of Elena's body. Not just preservation, as some would say. And she basically turned into this very insane-looking Norman Batesy psycho sort of half-wax, half-wire creature. And he even set up a phone in the mausoleum so he could call her in the middle of the night. And what's interesting about this is that it seems like it would be a cut-and-dry case of, bro, you were obsessed, you've done a horrible thing. But her sisters and surviving family, from my understanding, ended up being kind of okay with it, which is the really complicated part. They were like, because normally I'd be like, she didn't consent to that, this is so weird. But her sister apparently was like, well, he loved her. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess there was family consent, I don't know. So I don't know that I find that incredibly romantic, but it's certainly one of the iconic stories of love after death. You should share that with your non-death loving husband and see how he feels about that.
I'm sure he'd love that.
Yeah. That's what I'm gonna do with your body.
Well, that was my
We're
fear
getting
when
married.
that was a little bit of my fear when I came up, because originally when I was trying to think it in my head, it's like, what's the most romantic death story? I'm like, that doesn't sound good at all.
Yeah. I wish I had a sweeter story. I mean, there are all sorts of stories of, the husband dying 2 hours after the wife, after they've been married for 59 years, and those are very romantic. I chose to tell that other story.
I
See where I'm at the moment. But mazel tov in your impending nuptials.
Thank you
Good
so
luck.
much.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So, you mentioned in one of your videos you were thinking about doing like a documentary or something. Can we get a status update on that? And I don't follow your Twitter or anything, so. But I don't social media.
Oh, okay.
And also, if you did, would any of your like pilgrimages in this book be in that?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question was about a documentary. First of all, why are you pressuring me? Back off, bro. Basically, the idea was to raise money for this documentary, which went really well and has allowed me to have animators and writers and editors helping me, which is so cool, and pay them fairly, which is an awesome thing. And yeah, originally it was going to be more of a historical documentary, but it's shaping up to be more like a half-an-hour documentary about what we can do about burial and cremation, the problem of burial and cremation, and what we can do about it, and all the exciting things we can do to usurp it and replace it. Its rule of terror over the American public. And yeah, it's going really well, but the idea was that I was going to lead up to this book tour and I was going to spend the month filming it. And that didn't work out so well because turns out promoting a book is really exhausting, and I knew that, and I always bite off more than I can chew. So it's all set to be filmed in November. So it'll probably be out around Christmas time. You know, for the family Yule, for the family to like gather around the glowing Yule log of the computer to watch then. Yeah, and it's not so much about international death traditions. It's more about reforming the American funeral industry. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi.
So first off, I want to say thank you so much for your writing as well as your YouTube videos. You've been a big inspiration to me. I am now working on my internship to become a funeral director.
Great.
And I've been a vet tech for 10 years, so it's a change, but not as much as you think it would be. So that being said, do you have any regrets into becoming who you are now, as far as like you being a funeral director, or what would you tell a young deathling like myself who is embarking on this career path, who believes in the good death and green burials? I am working for the big bag corporation and utilizing them for what they can give me to hopefully move and branch out into green burials and my own sort of life outside of that. Regrets, advice?
Yeah, I regret every day. I'll wake up in the morning and tears are just streaming down my face. No, I don't have any regrets at all. I think that first of all, it sounds like you are really smart about this in exactly the way that I would want you to be. Because what question that I get a lot is from especially younger women who say, I think I want to do what you do. It looks really interesting. I think I want, I want to check it out. And I'm like, you can't check this out. Like, you are either profoundly, deeply committed to this and willing to crawl through hell to get there, or you're not gonna make it. Because especially if you have this dream of doing alternative services, what you're already doing, you have to go into the evil den of corporate funeral homes. We need people behind those lines, and we need people behind those lines to maintain their dignity and desire to do something different. And whether they're just gathering information, whether you're trying to influence from the inside, and you have a boss who's old school but is like, okay, well, I don't believe in the green burial hippie myth, but if you want to do it, I'll send them over to you. And you can have an influence that way and show them that, we've sold 2 green burials this month. This is a real thing. Or we've done 2 home funerals. This is a thing that we're doing now. However you want to influence it, you have to be prepared to enter an industry, as you already know, that's primarily run by older men. Old white dudes who got ideas about how things should be run. They don't all have that accent. Most of them do. If you've ever been to the NFDA conference. This is being filmed. Hi. Hi, guys. It's all right. You don't use the internet. It's fine. So if you don't have that kind of core belief that and I guess also the privilege to be that kind of rebel, it's not like I'm setting out and I just need a good job for my family. If you have the privilege to rebel a little bit and push the envelope, and you can do that, yeah, by all means do it. But know that you're not entering a magical world of green funerals and essential oils and gently shrouding the corpse. That's not all what it is. Wouldn't it be great if the world was that way, but we have a long way to go, and you're kind of in the first wave of people really doing it. So, but it sounds like you're being super smart about it. So good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello. Can people hear me? So first off, I wanted to say thank you. When my mom was passed away a few years ago, I don't know about everyone else here, but when I'm going through something difficult, I turn to books. So your book and Being Mortal and a few others were the ones that I turned to kind of help me process what my mom was going through. But my grandfather passed away a month or so ago, and we had a really interesting experience with his body. He passed away from complications from open heart surgery, and when they went to embalm him, he turned blue, like Smurf blue. Like they had to call in makeup people to make sure that he was not blue for the actual ceremony. And I guess I was shocked when they told us that they hadn't really seen that before, or that,
Yeah, I haven't seen that before.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure like whether they were like not being real with us, that this is something that doesn't
No, I
happen,
mean, I
or-
don't have any idea. I have never heard of that, of it turning blue. The only thing about turning blue I know is that one guy on the Today Show, the meme of the guy who turns blue because he eats a certain kind of iron or something. But obviously that was over. Does someone know? Someone like, oh no, it's because nah. But silver. Okay, yeah, obviously. But yeah, I really don't know. I genuinely don't know why that would have happened. And I think they were real with you in being very surprised that he turned blue.
Well, they said that they came across one case in a book, and that it had something to do with one of the medicines that they gave him at the hospital, and that just the embalming fluid that they used.
Yeah, the chemicals came together
yeah.
in one glorious, colorful explosion.
So I guess you answered my question of whether you had seen that before, but have you heard of any other kind of similar
No,
things
turning
like
blue
that?
I really haven't. I'll look into it, but I've really never heard of that. Something I will say though is that I know that obviously your family chose embalming, probably given the circumstance of it being during surgery. I was really surprised when I opened my funeral home. I thought that anybody who wanted to be with the body or dress the body or not choose embalming would automatically have to be people who died beautifully at home under no, dark circumstances at all. But what we're finding again and again is that people are coming to us with tragic deaths and wanting to be involved the same way they would if it was a beautiful at-home hospice death. And their father dies in a motorcycle accident or dies by suicide, and they've been autopsied, and they still want to come in. And at first we were like, oh, I don't know. Like, oh, this is above my pay grade. But it's really not. Because if you just are really honest with the family, like in your situation, we would have told you, okay, yeah, he died during open heart surgery. That can be kind of violent, to cut up the chest, but we've sewn it up in this way. But you're going to see these big scars. You're going to see the markings on his arm where he was, where the stuff went into his arms. And so he's going to be all these places. But if you want to do this, we're still going to give you the confidence and ability to come in and dress him and sit with him. And that's been really moving. And they've been sort of more emotional services than other services, but they've gone really well because people still want that autonomy and ability to do that. So I'm sorry you had that experience, and I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for you with that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Just gonna lead the do we have anyone on this side? Oh, hello. Another young man. This is like my dream. Yes, keep them coming.
So my question is, have you ever dealt with a corpse that has like a large wound that it had possibly died from?
Have I ever dealt with a corpse with a large wound that it had potentially died from? Something that we see a lot of, which is really unfortunate, are bed sores. Do you know what bed sores are? So what they are is when somebody is really old or really sick, they go to, say, a nursing home or a hospice, and they lie down in the bed. And when we're up moving around all day, so our blood is like moving through our entire body. But when you just lie down for sometimes 2 months at a time, all of your blood pools in the back of your body. And that's not good because it's too much blood in one spot. And it starts to basically rot a little bit back there. And it can cause really awful wounds on the back of a body. And this can be prevented if you're able to move and flip the body around enough. But often nursing homes don't have enough staff to be able to do that as enough as they need to. So sometimes you'll get an older person and it's really sad because they'll just be like a wound the size of a football on the back of this. I mean, there's no way this story was going to be charming, no matter, how I told it. But it's just really sad to see because obviously they had to live with essentially their back, rotting away beneath them.
Yeah, I'm starting to regret asking.
Yeah, you're starting to regret asking this question? I was like, what fun question, or like, what fun story about a giant wound can I tell? I just don't have one. But yeah, so we have to, kind of put powder on it and wrap it up with organic gauze and, know that they're not suffering anymore, which is a positive. They can rot all they want now. They're dead. You're supposed to rot when you're dead. It's just when you're alive that you're not supposed to rot. That's not how it's supposed to go. Thank you for your charming question. Everyone's in a fantastic mood. That's great. What's your name? Harry. Okay, Harry and Jay. Awesome. Hello.
Hello. My question is kind of what your thoughts on the significance of gravestones are, because I kind of struggle with, I don't enjoy the idea of embalming, but my interest in death first came from photographing gravestones, and I feel that it's a real significance, and you can also learn so much about a person that's been dead 100 years. Yeah. And you kind of, I've watched all the videos and read all the, everything pretty much. So I was just curious your thoughts on that, because I haven't heard much of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so did everyone hear that question? It's about gravestones. It's about the significance of gravestones. You like photographing gravestones and you think they share history and the, they're just beautiful. And if we're moving away from that, are we losing something? I think is what I was getting. Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful old cemeteries are beautiful old cemeteries. And I love being in them, and they're a sacred space to me. I'm not a very religious person, but when I'm in there, I just feel safe and awesome and meditative and reflective. And I'm walking along and I'm like, oh, Stuart, you died in 1912. Who are you, Stuart? You get these kind of reflective things, and it's a wonderful experience. I was actually, last night, I was speaking at Mount Auburn in Boston, which is the first big rural cemetery. It's like the American cemetery, basically. But to this day, they're really actually pretty innovative, and they've started offering natural burials, and they took me to where the natural burials were, and I've actually never seen natural burials like this because it was just grass and nothing there. It was like the bodies had just disappeared into the earth, and they were like, yeah, there's like 6 or 7 bodies buried under here, but it just looked like there were the historic gravestones and then this space of grass that you would just clomp right over and never know there was anyone there. And it's awesome that they're offering natural burial, but the woman who runs the cemetery was saying, yeah, there's been some pushback because people really want some sort of marker. Because right now they use GPS to find them. But people are saying, no, I really, and they do a plaque on the tree, but people were saying, I really want some kind of marker there. So it shows that there's still this almost human desire. And I was thinking about it, I was like, as much as I say, I want to be buried into the earth, ne'er to be seen again, I'm thinking of the natural burial cemetery model where there's still a mound of dirt over it, or someone would be able to plant a shrub, or someone would be able to have some little rock with my name etched on it. Then I was like, am I really ready to completely disappear into the earth? And I think that's something that we need to talk about. We need to talk about aesthetics. What do we really find beautiful? Some natural cemeteries have wooden headstones that are made out of like driftwood or beautiful artistic stones that aren't the old model, but are still really beautiful and perfectly fit in with the surroundings. So is that something that we're willing to compromise on in that way? So I don't have an opinion other than I hate the flat LA style headstones that we have exported to the rest of the world. Mount Auburn actually has a section that's just flat LA, and she's like, oh yes, you'll recognize this as the West Coast model. And I was like, why did you do this here? You didn't have to do this. He's like, well, people wanted it by the lake. And I was like, but they often say, why can't I have a regular headstone? Yeah, I bet they do, because those are ugly as hell. I don't like them. They're not my favorite. But other than that, an old headstone, yes. Mwah, love it. Thank you.
So we have time for about 4 more questions, if that's okay.
4 more questions. Let's do it. Hi.
Hello. I can't believe I'm actually talking to you in the flesh.
Same. I felt the same way when you walked up.
Yes, yeah. I'm telling everyone. I've been following your videos really since their inception. You've inspired me so much. I've had the death talk with my family and my loved ones, my parents, my brothers. I have an advanced directive. Like, I am ready to go, and that's because of you, and I just really appreciate it. So my question is, I come from the environmental policy space and sector, and actually this was a great lead up, you talking about your experience in Boston. I'm interested in the idea of kind of death as a means to conservation, specifically burial grounds and burial sites. The idea being if there's bodies there, it can't be used for development.
Yeah.
So what I kind of want to pick your brain about is what policies need to change and kind of at what level to protect new or historic burial sites. Can you speak to the status quo? Are there any barriers or challenges that need to be overcome? Because it seems to me that if there's big money behind a development coming in, they'll move the bodies. This is happening just across the Potomac River in Maryland with a historic burial site in front of the new casino. So I just kind of want to know where the success has been, where the challenge is, and yeah.
Yeah, actually I have a 14-page paper on this that I'll present to you after. No, that's a great question. My thoughts on this are, there's actually the woman who appears in the first chapter of this book on Crestone, Colorado, in the small town where they have the only open-air funeral pyre in the Western world. She is talking about she brought this up and she's like, what do you think about this? And I'm like, oh, another brilliant, innovative idea from you, Stephanie, which is that could we take old historic family cemeteries or community cemeteries that are dilapidated but are already sanctioned as cemeteries and open them to green burials? So if it's not a big corporate cemetery run by a for-profit company, but the community can come in and say, okay, we're going to keep up this cemetery. We're going to clean the hedges. We're going to reintroduce native plants and animals into it. And we're also going to open up this extra space for natural burials and families in our community who want them. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that who's stayed away from it, conservation burial, the idea of opening big natural burial grounds that preserve land, are places like Audubon and places like the Nature Conservancy, and big nature groups have been like, no thanks on the whole corpse plan that you guys have. But I think if it gets more publicly acceptable and it becomes more of a thing that when people hear about it, they're like, oh, what a beautiful idea, what a moving idea, then bigger conservancy places like that are going to get on board. So it's about the selling of it and about making sure that there are people in your sector, in the environmental sector, with actual money and actual influence who are just as excited about it as the older woman in Maine who's desperately trying to sanction this tiny plot of land to serve as a green cemetery. So yeah, good luck. I hope you're secretly plotting on this.
I'll go text my friends at the Nature Conservancy right now.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. I'll give you my straight email and we'll talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you're doing too. Thanks. Hi.
Hi. So I first also wanted to quickly thank you because I've kind of grown up being obsessed with death, and
that's cool. Good for you.
I mean, I've always, for a long time, I felt like there was something wrong with me because I was interested in going to catacombs or looking at gravestones.
but your videos and your book have made me like realize that it's okay to think about death in different ways. And recently, my grandmother passed away a little less than 5 months ago, and it was the first time that I really had to confront death because she lived with me all of my life, and suddenly she's not there anymore. And I don't cry, but reading your book really helped me process her death, and I wanted to thank you. My question is a lot less profound. So about 2 years ago, my other grandmother passed away, and at her funeral, she was in a really heavy lavender metal casket with a blouse that she didn't even own because she was always in her nightgown. So I noticed that when she was in her casket, she had plastic under her blouse. It was sheer, but I never felt comfortable asking anybody that question because that's weird, Sarah. Why do you want to know why your grandma's wrapped in plastic? But it's been burning me for a while.
Okay. So the question is, why was my grandmother wrapped in plastic? Okay, I have an answer for you. Man, they really love the lavender caskets for grandma. They really push those. They're like, oh, that's a grandma color. She would have loved this. The traditional funeral industry is very, very afraid of something going wrong, of anything going wrong during a viewing. And they will go to great lengths to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And that means any smells, any leakage, as they call it, anything coming from the nose, anything coming from the skin, anything coming from any part of the body is really unacceptable. Because, and here's why, the beautiful part, I think, about just keeping a body at home is that you kind of have to go with the idea that it was a human and it is a body and stuff's gonna happen. Might they poop? Maybe. Yeah. Might they come a little purge out of their mouth? Yeah, possible. Might there be a sort of weird smell for a little while if you have them for a long period of time? Yeah, who knows? But you've been taking care of them while they die. You've known this person all your life. Just deal with it. Clean it up, do what you have to do, move on. There's a kind of self-reliance and stick-to-itiveness and move forward no matter what happens that happens when you're in charge of your dead. But when a funeral home, a traditional funeral home, takes a dead body and they become the stewards of it and they're making it up and embalming it to basically sell it back to the family as this product, they have to make sure that absolutely nothing goes wrong because it's a completely different attitude that the family has. And my assumption is that they probably put some sort of Unionol or some sort of plastic wrap, just sort of a saran wrap thing on your grandmother because maybe she was leaking a little fluid or something was happening in her body that they were like, shut it down immediately. She's not going to be doing that during the service because the family is going to freak out. And they don't want to get sued primarily for that. So I think I kind of understand where they're coming from because if you're always worried about getting sued and you're always treating the body as like, I've laid out your grandmother in perfect repose and she must look like a waxen figure, nothing can go wrong. As opposed to a home funeral that's like, well, we're all in this together. Whatever happens, happens. And it's just a really different environment. So my assumption, it was just some embalmer's trick to make sure that nothing went wrong and she didn't leak in any way that you would find horrifying. But of course, what you found horrifying is why she was wrapped in plastic. Irony.
Oh, also, how do you get your bangs so perfect?
How do I get my bangs so perfect? That's an excellent question. I'm so glad you asked. I have a lot of things genetically. I got the short stick on a lot of things genetically, but for some reason, my parents' genes came together to create very bang perfection hair. I don't really do much to it. It just kind of does its thing. This was my one gift that I hath been given to do this work that I do. It's like it's my shield against evil.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we got 2 more, 1 and 2, and anybody else, I'm happy to answer questions. Hey, don't look at me like that. She's pouting at me. I'm not making this decision. I'm not in charge here. Yes.
Hi. So you talk a lot about death customs around the world and different things, and thank you, by the way, for ruining my dream of a Viking funeral.
I'm sorry. Again, not my fault. I didn't create reality.
Just a dream ruiner. What is your favorite death custom or burial tradition that you know of?
That's like asking me to choose between my children. My favorite death custom. I mean, this is well, it's not a boring answer at all, but it's my answer, and I guess it hasn't changed, is the Tibetan sky burial. I love the idea of the body being laid out, sliced up a little bit by a body breaker, laid out on this beautiful mountainside, and these vultures. And when I was doing research for this book, I always had this idea in my head of Tibetan sky burials. I didn't realize the vultures were huge. The vultures have 9-foot wingspans. They're like the size of this table and podium put together. They're huge. And when you see all of them together, it's like a horde of prehistoric creatures that have come to eat your body. And they swoop down around your body and make pretty quick work of your body and carry you up into the sky. And I just think it's so romantic. Speaking of romantic stories, wherever that young woman was, romantic love stories at death. That's it for me. I know it was one of my first and still has my heart. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, final question.
Hi.
Drum roll. Hi.
I grew up going to funerals in El Salvador, and I realized that I don't know if it's my town or it could be anywhere in the country, but the cemetery there is like really colorful, and they have like plastic flowers, and sometimes it gets overcrowded. But my question is, when I first experienced my American funeral, a friend of a family, it's really nice, but why don't they have colors and
It's a great question.
And since my family's opened up to me about expenses, I wonder why it's more expensive here than to get married somewhere else.
That's an awesome question. For in the back, you're from El Salvador, and your family's from El Salvador, and there are cemeteries there that are incredibly colorful. And in talking to people here, you wonder about why there is such a lack of color and why it's so expensive here versus El Salvador. I won't give my 49-minute answer on why it's so much more expensive here. That starts with like the Civil War and goes up until today. I won't do that to you tonight because they're trying to wrap me up. But it's so expensive. This is, as far as the color, I think that's just, that's kind of evolved as a drab American thing. And we come from the Victorian culture, which started as black. And so we added colors, but the colors had to be like the lavender casket for grandma. It couldn't be an actual exciting color. But the reality of the expenses is that the American funeral industry is regulated, so highly regulated in every state that they only allow for a funeral home to be run if a funeral home offers what's called a traditional funeral. And that means the entire business model of the American funeral industry is to make any money, you have to have this big embalming room, and you have to embalm the body, you have to sell the $6,000 to $7,000 casket, you have to sell the vault, you have to sell the hearse, you have to sell the viewing, you have to sell the flowers, you have to sell the whole rigmarole, or their business fails. And it's regulated to the point that other people cannot enter the industry to compete with that. So the only reason that I'm able to have my business in California, which offers green funerals and home funerals and whatnot, is because I live in California and it happens to be a state where I can get away with this type of thing. But in most states, they have something called ready-to-embalm laws. 29 states. What ready-to-embalm laws means is you always got to be ready to embalm. Doesn't matter if you're a Muslim funeral home or a Jewish funeral home or a green funeral home and you never plan on embalming anyone ever, you have to have the several $100,000 of infrastructure in your funeral home to embalm at any moment in case like a body falls from the sky and you need to chemically preserve it. And so that's such a huge barrier to entry to people, anyone trying to enter the industry. And what it means is that these smaller funeral homes, especially in rural areas, are going to start to fail because people don't want the $10,000 funeral anymore. They want something different that's meaningful but a lot simpler and less expensive. And so there's going to be a real moment of reckoning in the American funeral industry where they're going to have to deregulate some things and have to change some things, or we're all going to be out some funeral homes in the US. So that's the short answer to that, but that's a great question. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming.